Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, President Trump's veto will stand. Congress fails to block the national emergency order for a new border wall. We'll tell you what's next for the project as the military tries to find the money. And Mexican drug cartels are bringing more fentanyl into the U.S. The rise in smuggling at the San Ysidro port of entry.
They'll take this up to the front and they'll scan it and then they can get their food.
Upgrades for the San Diego Food Bank, how new technology is helping the charity better serve those in need.
But as the conditions change and we start seeing more frequent high tides, what we've seen is that the highway becomes more vulnerable than it has been before.
Planning for an uncertain future. As sea levels change, the city of Encinitas is taking steps to protect one of its busiest streets. KPBS Evening Edition starts now. Good evening. It's Tuesday, March 26th. Thanks for joining us. I'm Priya Sridhar. Congress will not be able to stop President Trump's plan to reallocate military funds to build a new border wall. Today, the House collected 248 votes to override a veto. 14 Republicans joined Democrats, but that's still 38 short of the two-thirds needed. President Trump vetoed a bipartisan bill that aimed to block his national emergency declaration to free up more than $3 billion. Meanwhile, the acting Secretary of Defense was on Capitol Hill today to explain where the money for a new border wall will come from. The Pentagon says it has repurposed $1 billion to pay for construction. An exact location has not been identified, only that it will cover 57 miles in the Yuma and El Paso areas. Some of the money is coming from military personnel funds that were unused because some branches fell short of recruitment goals. Here is some of what Democrats, Republicans, and the acting secretary had to say during a hearing before the House Armed Services Committee.
To look at the Pentagon as sort of a piggy bank / slush fund where you can simply go in and grab money for something when you need it really undermines the credibility of the entire DoD budget. Because if you've got $5 to $10 to $20 billion just lying around at the Pentagon for any particular purpose, then what does that say about whether or not you really need the money that you come up here telling us that you need?
Mr. Secretary, you may find yourself the target of a lot of criticism for decisions that you had nothing to do with today. I hope that's not the case. I, for example, share the chairman's view that we should not take Department of Defense resources and use it for other purposes. I know that that was not a decision you made.
We said, here are the risks, longer term to the department, and those risks were weighed. And then, given a legal order from the Commander-in-Chief, we are executing on that order.
The acting secretary also said it can reprogram $2.5 billion, but anything more would impact readiness and operations. The overall military budget this year is more than $700 billion. But prosecutors in San Diego say the nation's deadliest drug, fentanyl, is increasingly coming in through ports of entry like San Ysidro. We have two reports tonight, including Capital Public Radio's Sammy Caola on fentanyl's impact in California. But first, KPBS reporter Jean Guerrero on how Mexican cartels are gaining a foothold in the fentanyl trade.
Prosecutors in San Diego say the fentanyl from Mexico is transported into San Diego mostly in vehicles and pedestrian lanes at the ports. Sherry Walker Hobson is with the U.S. Attorney's Office. She says the people smuggling it are often U.S. citizens or legal permanent residents. And while much of the fentanyl comes across the border as powder, it's increasingly entering as fake oxycodone pills. Hobson says the doses aren't evenly distributed and can be lethal for people who think they're taking real oxycodone.
You may be a non-drug user, but you take one pill that contains multiple specks of fentanyl and you could die.
Hobson says San Diego is becoming an epicenter for the fentanyl trade. And as Mexican cartels increase their portion of the supply, fentanyl will become cheaper. Jean Guerrero, KPBS News.
The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention released findings last week showing fentanyl could be the third wave of the opioid epidemic. California's fentanyl death rate has roughly quadrupled since 2011. It still hasn't come close to what the East Coast is seeing. But Kelly Pfeiffer, a policy expert with the California Healthcare Foundation, says there's reason for concern.
We're just seeing more and more of these mass outbreaks of fentanyl being a surprise ingredient in something that people were taking.
In Chico this January, 12 people were hospitalized and 1 died after taking the drug. It caused a rash of deaths in the Sacramento area 2 years ago. Pfeiffer says health officials across the state are focused on saving drug users by giving out fentanyl test strips and an overdose antidote called Narcan. In Sacramento, I'm Sammy Kayola.
The San Diego Unified School District is considering whether to train teachers on how to revive students who overdose on opioids. The makers of the drug OXYCONTIN will pay $270 million to settle a lawsuit stemming from the national opioid crisis. Purdue Pharma reached the settlement with the Attorney General of Oklahoma. The case was the first of many set to go to trial across the country. The state sued the company for its role in the opioid crisis. OXYCONTIN is an opioid, the class of drugs that led to 48,000 deaths in the U.S. in 2017. The state of California might soon have tighter control over the child vaccination process. San Diego Assembly member Lorena Gonzalez is pushing a bill that would add a new layer to exemptions. Instead of being approved by a family doctor, requests would go to the Department of Public Health for final approval. Supporters of the bill say the goal is to cut down on doctor shopping and slow a recent uptick in unvaccinated students.
Few unethical physicians advertise medical exemptions for cash. These physicians were often not even trained in pediatrics or family medicine and were not providing ongoing care for these children. Instead, they were monetizing their medical license. An investigation in San Diego Unified School District showed that the percentage of kindergartners receiving a permanent medical exemption rose six-fold in only 3 years, with one physician writing nearly a third of the exemptions.
There are actually schools in my district, a highly immunized district, that have now fallen below the community immunity rate in their kindergarten class. That puts everybody at jeopardy.
The bill would also allow the state to invalidate past exemptions that are proved to be without merit. Those opposing the bill say vaccination laws violate parental rights. California's marijuana industry is tapping into a growing customer base. AP reporter Krista Faria shows us how seniors in Orange County are arriving at pot shops by the busload.
The bus arrives promptly. It's 11 a.m. About 50 residents at the retirement community of Laguna Woods, California, eagerly board for today's outing. But this isn't your typical shopping excursion.
People from 55 all the way to their 90s come here to learn about how to use cannabis to replace their current medications, or even some seniors even use it recreationally.
Cannabis dispensary Bud and Bloom provides a free shuttle to its store once a month for people in the community.
Yeah, these two then.
With medical marijuana or recreational use legal in more than half the states, more older Americans are turning to cannabis for relief,
For sleep, for hunger, for pain,
and recreation.
This is an important time to try to study the effects of cannabis in older people, because the older age group is the segment of our population that is showing the greatest uptick in cannabis use.
Like Lori Linda, she uses cannabis nearly every day.
It makes me feel good. It keeps me from getting really upset and angry. Just watching the news sometimes makes you want to go get a gun. And I don't want to do that.
The 76-year-old says she likes to mix things up, including smoking it, vaping, and eating cannabis-infused tofu.
And that's garlic on top. I think most people are a lot more open to it now. I think because they're actually learning more about it. We never saw articles in the newspaper.
The baby boomer generation was notorious for indulging in marijuana during the 1960s and 70s. But many users changed their habits as they got older.
I used to do it when I was like 18, 19, 20, and had a baby, got married, and stopped doing it. I missed it at times.
Now as they retire, some people are rediscovering marijuana or trying it for the first time. But experts say people should talk to their doctor before giving it a try.
We have to be careful because we know that cannabis can cause side effects. Particularly in older people, they can get dizzy. It can even impair memory if the dose is too high or the ingredients are wrong. And dizziness can lead to falls, which can be quite serious.
But that didn't seem to worry this group, infused with excitement to try out their new purchases. Krista Fourier, Associated Press, Laguna Woods, California.
I'm Judy Woodruff. Tonight on the NewsHour, President Trump visits Capitol Hill as the Mueller report divides lawmakers along political lines. Coming up at 7 after Evening Edition on KPBS.
The criminal justice system often has to deal with issues regarding mental health. KPBS's Deb Welsh has details on a new approach approved by the county.
Chief Administrative Officer Helen Robbins-Meyer, after a 4-0 vote, is charged with developing a plan that will include timely follow-up care and case management for those in crisis. It will also include the establishment of centers providing 24/7 walk-in mental health and substance abuse treatment. In addition, school districts and the County Office of Education will be called on to develop a school-based crisis response system. Robbins-Meyer will work with the District Attorney's Office and the Sheriff's Department to develop the plan and then return in 90 days with recommendations. Deb Welsh, KPBS News.
The San Diego Food Bank is working to speed up how it gets food to people in need. KPBS reporter Matt Hoffman says a grant will help them do it.
The food bank is expanding a program that's getting rid of long lines for food assistance.
Instead of waiting an hour or 2 hours in line for food, now they're basically coming in, come out, get their food, allows them to go off to school, goes them to get their work or what have you, but they're still providing nutritious food for their family.
Number 8! It's all thanks to a personalized ID card that lets people sign up ahead of time for food help.
So they'll take this up to the front and they'll scan it and then they can get their food.
When the food bank signs someone up for the card, it helps them learn how to better serve people.
We gather this information about our service recipients, what their background is, where they come from, what their needs are, because you really can't create regional strategies unless you know who your service population is.
The food bank says the modernization is all part of its goal to better help people in need.
We're not a food bank anymore. We're a nutrition bank because we're really working towards breaking the cycle of poverty. Fresh produce, having a full-time nutritionist on staff, really being able to lift people out of poverty. But again, unless you know who you're serving, how do you create strategies to help them?
86 food bank partners are currently using the card system, with another 50 expected to join this year. The expansion is made possible with a $375,000 grant from United Healthcare. Matt Hoffman, KPBS News.
The San Diego Food Bank says it serves more than 350,000 people a month. The operators of the San Onofre Power Station will pay a 6-figure fine over its handling of nuclear waste. Federal regulators issued a $116,000 fine connected to a mishap that happened last year. Those transfers have been on hold. Crews are trying to move the canisters from cooling stations to underground bunkers. SoCal Edison says it takes full responsibility for the mishap and will not dispute the fine. Engineers are manufacturing a solution to help protect a busy coastal road in San Diego's North County. If nothing is done, rising sea levels will increasingly threaten to wash out Highway 101 between Encinitas and Solana Beach. From the KPBS Climate Change Desk, environment reporter Eric Anderson has details.
Highway 101 is busy. People driving between Solana Beach and Encinitas can take this scenic road instead of hopping onto a nearby but frequently congested Interstate 5. And Encinitas City Council member Kelly Shaw-Hinsey says the road draws more than just car traffic.
So this is a stretch of highway where people like to run, ride bikes, and take in sort of this amazing scenic viewshed that we have on either side of the highway.
Shaw-Hinsey stands next to the large rocks which offer protection from high waves. The boulders serve as the last defense against an ocean that is increasingly putting pressure on local shorelines. She says on some stormy days it's best to drive on the freeway.
The highway was built on a very vulnerable sand spit, and this is what has been there to protect it for the last couple of decades. But as the conditions change and we start seeing more frequent high tides, what we've seen is that the highway becomes more vulnerable than it has been before.
This is low tide, no need for armoring this road, Highway 101. But when the tide comes in and there's a storm swell on top of it, the water actually washes over that roadway.
It has a history of going completely over 101 and closing the road and eroding it. We've had, in larger storms, damage.
Encinitas civil engineer Pete Milligan shared some photos of the damage. Pictures from 2010 show standing water on the highway and in the parking lots of several local businesses. Local streets were also flooded this winter during a high tide event that was coupled with a storm. At one point, high waves pushed cobblestones onto the roads. Milligan is hoping to protect the road through a unique plan that also creates sandy dune habitat that's pretty rare along the California coast. The Cardiff Living Shoreline project is due to be complete in April. It starts with an excavator digging a deep trench beside the road.
They come in and put filter fabric, the black fabric, in, and that really helps with the water not being able to get under the rock, erode the sand, and basically keeps it in place.
In addition to that, crews are lifting large boulders and stacking them on top of the fabric. The large rocks, or revetment, are then covered up with sand dredged from the nearby lagoon.
Where we have a final line of defense of the rock, which is going to save the road, but everything in front of it we're going to have to adjust and perfect as the project goes along over time. But if it was just sand, it would just go and we'd be in the same condition that we were before.
Milligan says the sandy habitat area is roped off and protected. It'll be allowed to settle and drain before native plants are added. That is exactly what conservationists did on a test project at the southern end of this beach. Bradley Nussbaum works with the San Elijo Lagoon Conservancy. He is standing on dune habitat that used to be a parking lot.
This is a pretty good representation of exactly what the dune should be looking like. Kind of a nice little hummocks flowing on it with vegetation. And this will probably be about the same density of the vegetation that we'll be experiencing there.
The dunes will offer space for flowers like the beach primrose, which sports bright yellow blooms, or purple blossoms of sand robina. Nussbaum says the habitat should also be an inviting space for the western snowy plover. This beach is already one of the most popular roosting spots for the federally endangered bird.
With this, this 60-foot of protected dune area where people won't be walking, that'll give them that kind of protected space where they can actually keep away from potential traffic.
The project is a complicated partnership between conservation groups, local governments, and state agencies. All are looking forward to seeing how the project stands up to the pounding the ocean can bring. Shay Hinsey says it's a work in progress.
We're not going to expect these dunes to be frozen in a moment of time. Sort of the beauty of it is that they can change, they can be dynamic.
And project managers concede it's not a permanent protection for the road. They say the ocean will eventually reclaim Highway 101 as sea levels rise, but they think this might be a good way to keep the road open for several more decades. Eric Anderson, KPBS News.
Separate from the Dune project, the city of Encinitas is considering a redesign of Highway 101, which may include bike lanes and roundabouts. The city council is scheduled to discuss the issue at tomorrow night's meeting. We'll expect more sunshine tomorrow and a warm-up on the coast later this week. Erin Calandra has details in tonight's forecast.
Well, I hope you had a great day today. Our weather was beautiful. Look at this. Nothing but warmth for San Diego County. We had lots of sunshine. That's going to continue. Here's a look at our radar satellite. You can see to the north of us, we are seeing some precipitation. Today, they're kind of getting a break. Some rain, but not a lot. That's going to change tomorrow as a stronger storm comes in. For us, though, not much going on. Maybe a few clouds floating past. It's going to stay nice and dry, though. And our futurecast, not much going on, not for now. Now taking a look at tonight, 56 degrees, partly cloudy skies, and across the county, it's going to be pretty quiet. In Ramona, 44, El Cajon, 52 degrees, and Mount Laguna at 43 degrees. Now tomorrow, with that storm coming in, we will see showers creeping further south, but we expect it to stay north of LA. And we expect to see dry conditions across San Diego County, and our temperatures will actually be increasing. We're going to have an offshore flow, more sunshine, warmer conditions toward the end of the week, but we could also see some gustier conditions for drivers through those passes. So tomorrow in Oceanside, mostly sunny at 67, San Diego at 68, very average. Borrego Springs up to 82, and Mount Laguna kind of chilly still in the mountains at 56. Along the coast, look at this, nothing but sun, very pleasant conditions. Again, with that offshore flow, our temperatures increase. By the weekend, we're in the 70s. Inland, it's going to be warmer throughout the week. By Sunday, we're sitting at 81 degrees. In the deserts, we're sitting in the 80s all week, mostly sunny, just beautiful. It is that time of year where you need to think about bringing a water bottle around with you, stay hydrated. And in the mountains, well, it's going to be a cool 50-ish throughout the whole entire week, and our lows are still dipping down in the 30s, but it will remain nice and bright. For KPBS News, I'm Erin Calandra. Back to you.
A new KPBS podcast takes a closer look at the place where San Diego and Tijuana meet. Only Here shares the stories that are unique to this border region. I chatted with podcast host Alan Lilienthal about the new episodes. So, Alan, tell me about the inspiration for your podcast.
Well, we live in Tijuana, San Diego, which is the most cross-border in the world. There's a lot of amazing and fascinating and inspiring stories here. The story of the border is obviously covered a lot in the news, but you don't very often get to hear from the people who really live it on a daily basis. And I think those people deserve to be heard.
So what are some of the stories that listeners can look forward to hearing in the coming weeks?
Yeah, there's really a lot of fascinating stories, as you can imagine here. The border is a very dynamic region. One example is there's a community in Sherman Heights who keeps their Mexican culture and the Mexican roots alive by celebrating Dia de los Muertos. There's a couple in Rosarito who grows these marigold flowers, which are very traditional in Dia de los Muertos. And you know the struggles they face getting them across the border, and people wanting to connect with their roots and not being able to necessarily even hug their family. That's an example of one of the stories.
And how often is the podcast going to come out?
The podcast comes out every 2 weeks on Wednesdays, Podcast Wednesdays.
So there are 3 episodes that are available to download today. Can you help introduce the first one for us?
Yeah, the first one is about Beto Soto, who is a photographer, grew up here in San Diego, completely undocumented and gay, and he wasn't able to talk to anyone about that growing up. And that experience, as you can imagine, was heavy, but instead of letting that bring him down, he used that as fuel to create a platform called UndocuQueer to document the experiences of people like him, the LGBTQ community that lives in San Diego and is also undocumented, and it's honestly very inspiring. Beto is openly gay now, but he didn't come out until a few years ago.
It all just came out like vomit, and I'm like, oh my God, this is not how I pictured my coming out. I wanted a party. I wanted a cute rainbow flags, and you know what I mean? But it wasn't that way, and it had to happen in order to keep me safe. You know, I think if I wouldn't have done that, I would have probably fallen into a dark place and not followed my, goals and ambitions.
So the border in music and art isn't just a podcast for you, it's actually your life.
It is, yeah. I just got here from Tijuana. I cross it almost every day. Pretty much all the work I do is geared towards cultivating a cross-border conversation. I'm in a band called Tu Lengua, which is a bilingual, members from both sides of the border kind of thing. And yeah, it's the life I live.
Sounds like a really interesting story. Well, I've been speaking with Alan Lilienthal, host of the new KPBS podcast. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
And you can check out the Only Here podcast episodes on Apple's iTunes, Google Play, and kpbs.org. Here's a recap of tonight's top stories. Congress will not be able to stop President Trump's national emergency declaration for a new border wall. The president recently vetoed a bill that challenged the order. Today, the House fell short of the required votes needed for an override. Prosecutors in San Diego say Mexican drug cartels are playing a larger role in the smuggling of fentanyl. They also say most of it is smuggled at the San Ysidro port of entry by U.S. citizens or legal permanent residents. The CDC reports a steep rise in fentanyl-related deaths in the past couple of years. San Diego Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez is pushing a change to the state vaccination law. Her bill would require state approval for parents who seek an exemption for their kids. It would also allow the state to invalidate any past exemptions that are proven to be without merit. And here's a look at what we're working on for tomorrow in the KPBS newsroom. San Diego's Metro Transit system recently asked for ideas on how to repurpose some of its parking lots and other land. On Morning Edition, we'll tell you about some of those submissions. And on Midday Edition, the Padres return to Petco Park this week. Those who follow the team tell us what to expect this season. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thank you so much for joining us and have a great evening.